There we go. All right. Well, while the room is populating, I guess let me start with, I was a restaurateur for about 20 years myself. And Monday was always my day off, if I got one. For those of you that are loading into the room, can you jump into the chat right now and let me know, are you off today or are you on today? Just reply off or on, and let's check that out while the room is filling up. Go to the chat and type in off or on, depending on if you are working today or not. On. There we go. Same. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you for participating. I appreciate the help.
Josh, I'd love to know how many that you're actually off for. I love the concept, but yeah. Did you actually get Mondays off?
No, the phone always rang. Always.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, don't call me unless it's an emergency. And they would be like, yo, where's the quat sanitizer? And I'm like, you know where it is. They're like, well, we looked and it wasn't there. And I'm like, did you look with your eyes or did you look with your hands? Yeah. Because we look with our hands. That way we don't have to call Josh, but it's so much easier just to call me.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for participating in the chat. I am assuming you are all literally working on the floor as we speak. So let's just get started. I'm pleased to introduce hospitality leadership coach and, more importantly, my friend, Matt Rolfe. Yeah. He is the author of the book, You Can't Do It Alone, focusing on people to scale and develop and lead your restaurant. And today he's going to be delivering actionable advice on how to lead your restaurant and your team successfully in all seasons. What makes Matt exceptional is the way that he's able to take these high-level ideas around business management and leadership and apply them granularly to what we do as owners and operators on a daily basis. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Josh Kopel. I'm a Michelin-rated restaurateur, and I've spent the last few years talking about running restaurants instead of actually running them. And I've done this with a singular goal in mind, to figure out if there's a recipe for guaranteed success in our industry. I also host Full Comp, a podcast that airs twice weekly, unpacking the tools, tactics, and strategies of our industry's greatest leaders. It's a selfish endeavor. I have the privilege of talking to folks that I idolize, and I only ask the questions that I want to ask. But the town hall is your turn. Today, Matt answers the questions that you've asked, and I encourage you to use the Q&A function to ask questions throughout our conversation if there's anything you want to dig deeper on. We'll also leaving time at the end for live Q&A. And with that being said, welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you so much, Josh. Thanks to you up for restaurants. I love some. I don't think I've ever had a custom intro shared before. I appreciate that, my man. The extra effort is.
Oh,
we're out of the gate strong here.
Yeah, for sure. Nothing but the best for you.
Awesome, brother.
All right, let me share my screen and we will get this party started. Like all restaurateurs, I am challenged when it comes to technology. So we're going to do our best here, guys.
Yeah.
So to start, look at the smug guy on the right. Kills me. Changing that photo this week. Let's start with the first question. What are the keys to running a successful restaurant in challenging economic times?
Awesome. And I think it's a great question to start. And before I do, the term hospitality leadership coach is a mouthful, but ultimately I just really help people get clear on their strategies to move forward. And one thing I say forward, especially in a situation like this, where some people may know me, most may not, some of what I'm going to share today is going to create resistance. And it's almost designed intentionally to create resistance where you hear something, you might immediately shut it down, or it might give you a feeling that that doesn't relate to your operation, or that might not work for you. As Josh and I go through these questions together that you have submitted, I really encourage you, when you feel resistance, just to pay attention to it. That's often where the work that needs to be done starts. And when we can find resistance, we can usually find motivation for change. As we get into these first questions, it is one of the most challenging times in my career, which I've spent my entire life in hospitality. It's one of the most challenging times that we've ever faced. So my intention here, spark some interest, find some resistance, but most importantly, hopefully help you create some change. And the first question that we got to is, what's the key to running a successful restaurant? And I want to start with the leaders that are dialed in now. My biggest thing is what starts with a successful restaurant is what's your physical state when you show up. We've just gone through 2 years of crashing waves, 3 years of crashing waves, from a pandemic, no matter where you were in the world, to supply chain issues to staffing crisis to end. But what's your physical state when you're showing up to your restaurant every single day for yourself, for your people, for your guests? And then what's driving you? Why are you still in this business here today? Whether you're an owner or a manager, what's driving your motivation and your success? And then I really do feel that the next stage is our strategy. But I believe 70% of our results are driven by our physical state and how we show up. But to get into this, and you'll hear me echo and repeat myself throughout this podcast, because I think repeating messaging is critical. But one of the key things to running a successful restaurant is two real questions. What is your commitment to your guest? What is that experience? Why does your community need you to exist? And what's the experience that you're looking to create that allows you to stand out? Any restaurant, any major city across the world doesn't necessarily need another restaurant. There will be restaurants close in every major city. Why do they need your restaurant? And often we want to start with the guest. But the question that I'll back up with is also, what's your commitment to your people? What's your promise to your managers? What's your promise to your staff? Because they're the ones that have to show up day in, day out, table after table, face to face with your guest, or in your back of house or heart of house, to deliver an experience that allows you to be sustainable. So the first thing, and this might sound simple, we're getting to the heart of this or the guts of this as we go through today, but what's the state? What's that energy you're bringing in? What's your why? Why does it matter? Why does your community need you to exist? What's your promise to your people? And what's your promise to your guests? And those are thought-provoking questions before we start to get into the details.
Yeah, I mean, there are two things I'd love for you to unpack here. Now, the first is overwhelm. So, if there's one feeling that everyone on this call has experienced ad nauseum, it's overwhelm. And so it takes courage to participate in like learning events like this, because it's not like everybody that's on the call doesn't have 1,000 other things to do. And, there's this great quote from a guy named Derek Sivers who said that, if knowledge was enough, everyone would be a billionaire with a six-pack, because it's the execution of that knowledge that is really worth anything. And so here we are at the top of this conversation, and I think you're going to provide really, really actionable content. But again, the key to running a successful restaurant isn't in the ideation. It's not even in the possession of knowledge. It's in the execution. So what is your advice around overcoming the day-to-day overwhelm in order to work on your business and create the traction that you need to own a successful restaurant?
Yeah. And I appreciate it. Like, I've gone through the overwhelm myself. I'll share up front. I've gone through burnout. I'll share up front that I'm somebody who struggles with anxiety and depression. So as a leader, the last few years has been incredibly challenging. I don't stand here as somebody or on this video chat with the answers. I stand here sharing my experience, not just from myself, but from my leaders, but in my own work and the work with my clients. One thing I observe the most is, as humans, we do two things. We either move away from pain or we move towards pleasure. And the challenge is, for most of us, is we move away from pain. And if you're on the floor and you've got something plugged in, if you're in your back office holding the door to get through this recording, you're here for a reason. And Josh shared something up front, which is great leadership. Josh shared something very simple. He said, I'm really selfish for why I'm doing this podcast. And he means that in a humorous way, but he also means it in a candid way. We need to have a bit of selfishness of, is what you're doing today working for you? Because in order to find positive leverage, and leverage might sound like a negative term, but all of us to create change usually need a shift or a moment or leverage, is how do we find that moment to say, what I'm doing right now, my staffing is too difficult. My guests, my restaurant's not as full as I want. I'm not profiting what I feel I deserve, different from want, but I feel I deserve from my business. So how do we create that positive leverage for change? And I find that rather than just the execution tactics, there's a stop moment for all of us. And if you're really successful, the most successful operators I've ever worked with, they want more. And in order to get more, you need to do different. And one of the taglines in all of our talks, keynote talks for the last 12 months, is what you've done in the last 12 months will not lead to success. Even if you're highly successful, will not lead to the same success in the next 12 months. So in order for us to make that change, to get you the results you want and deserve, we need to change your actions and behaviors. But before we start to give you tactics, we need to find the grounding and the motivation. And there's some deep stuff. And I want people to really, really hear that. What's your motivation for change? Because if gravity's not strong enough, you will go back to old behaviors. I speak from experience. I've tried it all. I've read as much as I can. I've been to all the courses. But if my motivation for sustainable change wasn't strong enough and revisited frequently enough, it's easy to go back to old behaviors. But change is really possible, and the process is simple.
and to beat this point to death, and then I swear to God, we'll move on.
Sure.
But when we look at the keys to running a successful restaurant in challenging economic times,
Mhm.
I've done over 300 interviews with literally the iconoclast in this industry. And I can tell you that the one universal thing, because they're all different and exceptional in different ways, but it frames the rest of the conversation we're going to have. The one quality that they all shared was that there was a restaurant owner directly involved in the business. And by that, I don't mean like a restaurant owner functioning as a manager, covering for the dishwasher and the server and doing the schedule. There was a restaurant owner who was only doing the things that restaurant owners do to propel the business forward. And the conversation that we're having today is about restaurant owners really leaning into the work that only they can do to propel their business forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've all adopted behaviors to make it to this stage, and sometimes behaviors become habits. I remember walking in a few months ago into a restaurant and saw the VP on the line. And this is a major restaurant group, 500 million plus in sales. And I said, hey, lunch is going to be great today. And I, knowing it's Yelp, I won't tell you what he said, but he told me off pretty quick. And he's just like, this is what we've been stuck doing. And I stayed around and we brought his leadership team, because the whole VP team, there was 4 of them, and said, okay, we've done this to get here, but does that get us where we want to go? And sometimes we need, in times of challenge and change, your people, your guests, your communities need leadership. And we need to give ourselves permission to go back to leadership. And rather than just that fear base of what's required to get through the day. I say that heartfully and respectfully, but we're going to start to, hopefully today we can share some things to get us back to what we need to drive our business forward.
And that brings us to the next question, which is, what does a resilient restaurant look like? If we're going to be successful in all seasons, how would that restaurant function?
Looking right now that there's lots of different restaurants, concepts, categories, whether it could be hotels, could be QSR, full service, fine dining, whichever it is on this call. A resilient restaurant, what I feel in 2023 is there's a transition from pivoting and innovating and making changes to survive and to get here. I want you to learn from what you had to do to get here, but what's at your core? Again, why does your community need you to exist? How do you fight your competition? What allowed you to get to this stage? There is a recipe of success. If you're 12 months in or 22 years in, that's allowed you to be successful in your restaurant, in your community. And a resilient restaurant might innovate. There's a concept from the book Good to Great by Jim Collins called Preserve the Core and Stimulate Progress. For most high performing restaurant leaders and teams and companies that I'm working with right now, we're going back to that core. What is your core identity? Who are you? What do you deliver? What's the experience? What's the quality of product? What allows you to separate yourself? And sometimes I get responses of, I don't know how to go back to that. Like, I don't remember exactly what it was. I'd encourage people, if you're able to, is even go back to that time before you got the key, that when you had that key in your hand and you turned the lock on the door because you had a business plan and a dream and a concept. You put your house on your line, you left your job, you did whatever you needed to. What was it in that time when you go back to when that key went in the door for the first time you got your lease, or the first day you opened? What was it all about then? And often we want to go back and think of those vivid memories and vivid stories and experiences and bring them back. But a resilient restaurant has simplicity and clarity rather than complexity, and they are charging forward with momentum. We've had so much noise over the last couple of years. How do we restrict the noise, get clear on our focus, and attack?
It's so easy to get distracted. So in the restaurant coaching that I do, I'll talk with owners and operators that'll say, oh, well, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to pivot on Thursday nights and do this live music thing that we've never done before. And that's going to be what revolutionizes the business. And I can tell you, as an owner and operator myself, there were so many ideas I had that we executed on to varying degrees of success that we thought, oh, this is the thing. This is really going to be this is the thing. And I know that everybody's watching and nodding their heads because we've all been there. And none of those things are the thing. What was actually the thing for us was doing the boring work, which the best way I've ever heard it described was this idea of the job to be done. What job does your restaurant serve in your community? What are they looking to you to do? right? Is it a place to get a quick bite for lunch? Is it a place that you celebrate special occasions with your family? Like what, is it a after church Sunday brunch kind of place? Like what job does your community want you to serve? Because once you figure that out, you are 100% right, Matt. You can easily charge forward and double down and say, people that do this, right, that facilitate this job, they also do these things. And so all of the deviations you make you more yourself, as opposed to this kind of collection of disparate ideas kind of all cobbled together because this competitor is doing this, so we'll steal that, and this competitor is doing this. It's really about becoming more yourself, right?
Yeah. And I was working with a quick service group last week, and we to kind of get granular on this, or maybe for those that are sitting there and really worried about their operation right now, even if it's successful, doesn't mean there's not fear creeping in. But we really looked at contribution and what were the major contributing hours of the week that led to the bulk of their sales, really that identity of who they were. And for many restaurants, we can break that into 8, 13, 15 hours a week that contribute the bulk of the sales. And we just got granular. What do we need to do in those times? Like those times were just us, whatever the product is, whatever the experience is, whatever the delivery is. How do we be relentless and consistent for our people so they feel safe? Hopefully we'll talk about safety later, and your staff, it's critical. But for your guests, they can rely on you. People have less money to spend. They want to know what they're going to get. How do we master the major contributing hours of your week? And everybody can find this out through your POS system, and just slow down. If you're a operations mind, do the work, find the hours, attack and crush those hours. And then we can innovate around them should we need to or choose to. But most of your success, if you're looking to fight through 2023, is going to come through very focused day parts that we need to be relentless and consistent. And once we master those, it'll set the foundation for success for 2023.
How do we reset our organization? Oh my goodness. How do we reset our organization to not be built around fear? I think it starts with leadership, but I mean, man, I spent 20 years scared every day, even on the good days. Like there was always this pit in my stomach. And I think that infects the rest of the leadership team, the line level employees. It's such a huge part of what we do.
And there's a couple of things there. And one of them, I think most high performing leaders I get a chance to get exposure to, and there's a coined term of productive paranoia, that they operate in that space, that they're constantly concerned and looking for opportunity. And I can relate that I felt this way. And for a long time, I felt that it was a problem. I really did, because I was constantly catastrophizing in my business of what could go wrong. But there can be power in that, as long as, again, where I started, our physical state. We're allowed to have fear. We're allowed to show up. But how do we show up consistently? We don't need to be fake and not show fear, because everybody knows the conditions where you are. How do we be real? But how do we make sure to show up consistent and make our people and our guests feel safe in what we're building inside the organization? But when it comes to looking to reset an organization around fear, is we're coaching everybody we work with that just like the weather, business has seasons. And right now we're in the season of winter. We've just gone through a pandemic and some challenging seasons, and we might be, no matter where you are in the world, staring down the eye of a recession. But it's those that get focused in the season of winter. No winter lasts forever. Spring will come. But it's what do we do with clarity and focus right now that allow us to weather this storm? And to be dramatic here, to go back for effect, is just to take a guess. How long do you think that the Great Depression was? We go back to the Great Depression. How many years do you think the Great Depression lasted? Just to take a guess.
3 to 5 years.
Yeah. So I'm not, this is a history lesson. So somebody took me through this. It's actually 11 to 12 years, depending on how you look at it. And we look at that experience for so many, was one of the hardest times. And what followed shortly after the Great Depression? It was war. And when we look to what we're going through now, and this really stopped me in my tracks when somebody took me through this, because I'm like, how could we possibly be looking in recession after, we've just gone through pandemic and staff shortages and supply chain and inflation. But the reality is there's a season of winter, and we're still in it. But even when we look to having the Great Depression followed by war and be dramatic through a story, excuse me, but then we went through into this boom, and the boom will come, spring will come back. But when we look at the history, and you can look at your city, there have been people during the last major challenge we had was the financial crisis. There were people in your city, entrepreneurial startups that thrived multi-site groups, independents who cemented their mark in the time of winter. It's just really now, so how do you get back to your core? How do you stay the course? And I know this can be hard, but this won't last forever. And there is another side. We need to make sure that we fight relentlessly to stay safe and stay profitable enough to continue to make it through this. And so we're built this, the season will pass, winter will end, and spring will come.
Yeah, 2 points I'd like to bring up to you that were valuable for me as an owner operator. The first is visibility.
Mhm.
So not that I shared my fear with people, but that I shared my process. So part of what we would do in a pre-shift is I would kind of give the state of the nation, right? Here's where we are. Here's how much money we're looking to bring in this week or this weekend. And these are the initiatives that are coming around the corner. And here's the expected result, right? We're doing a collaboration with this local chef to do this. We're going to ticket it. We're hoping to sell this many tickets. And then we intend to do this with the profit from that. And what it did was it enrolled my team. They saw what we were trying to do, and they understood that we weren't infallible. I think the hardest thing for me as a leader was trying to drop that infallibility, right? That everyone's going to freak out and everyone's going to leave if they don't think that I know exactly what I'm doing. When, like, spoiler alert, I can't envision a scenario where anyone who has ever met me thinks I know exactly what I'm doing. But I felt this compulsion to be that and to show that. But what I found was I was less afraid when I felt like 36 people were working in collaboration with me to accomplish these goals because we were all aligned. And I thought they were less fearful because they were clued in.
Yeah, I hope everybody listening just really, heard that, of just to hear what Josh shared. So to slow it down, to share how he felt and the fear and how we chose to continue to communicate. So, but a lot of us on this call right now can relate to that feeling, to that fear, to the challenge of showing up to the business every day. And you are not alone. Like, this is something that we all feel. And one thing when I talked to leaders, what led to their success during the pandemic was communication, whether you were open or not, was just continuing to communicate. But some of us got away from communication. What Josh just shared there in a granular best practice was he continued to share so people could hear. Because if you think of our own challenges, when we're in fear often means loss, and loss means when there's an unknown. But when we communicate, even if there's not an update, even if we fell short of our goals, we hit our goals, it's irrelevant as long as we're communicating so people can see themselves inside the operation and continue to move forward. There's brilliant stuff there. Continue to communicate whatever information you have, feel comfortable sharing, so your people understand where your business sits.
100%. Oh, here's a good one. On the tip of everybody's tongue. How can I establish balance? Well, I mean, let's go even higher level. Is it even possible to establish balance and avoid burnout personally as an owner and operator? And then what about for your team as well?
Yeah. My instinct is almost to tell me a little bit what balance means to you, Josh, like to bring some context, like, because I have my position on balance and my belief around it, but what did balance mean to you? What did burnout mean to you? Or was it allowed, possible, not for the operation, for yourself? Because for everybody listening out there, this is a personal reflection question, no matter your position, no matter your restaurant, no matter your concept.
So I felt, I'm sure many of us did. I felt reasonably well balanced prior to the pandemic.
Sure.
And then when everything shut down and I was at home with my family, I realized how out of balance I was.
Yeah.
That I think, I had a 1.5-year-old at home. I think I had changed maybe 1 or 2 diapers. I had never given her a bath. And I realized through that process that there was no balance. That, I had redefined balance through the lens of the industry, which was I had 2 days off in a row. And if my phone only rang a few times on those days that were off, that felt like a real win. So, what I have worked to do is create boundaries and non-negotiables to have established balance and burnout at this point, and avoid burnout at this point.
Yeah. And that's, powerful. When Josh shared that, as somebody, I'm an emotional person, so I don't know if people can see the video, but I get tears in my eyes thinking about that, bathing your daughter, because I have a daughter at home and I have a 2-year-old son at home. Excuse my voice, but that's the motivation, right? So we can continue to drive, and we all have to work hard. I believe in hard work, and I don't believe in bounce. I feel that my position on this, based on my experience is not right, but they are my values. Wherever I am fully present, and I am all in. And I found a way to disconnect in certain hours. So when I get a chance to be home, and now with my 2-year-old son, bathe my son, read to my daughter, which I found that I wasn't doing, is that it was that motivation for change. But I think the side is, if we look to, anyone that's on Instagram or YouTube and we watch these celebrity entrepreneurs, there was all the breaking point in their careers where they said enough's enough. And there's so many of them that went too far and lost marriages. So how much are you willing to risk? And Josh started this up, is how do we get back as owners to be doing what matters most? And what I encourage for you is to surrender to the fact that we can't get it all done. That mountain's going to be there the next day. It's our ability, as Josh shared, to set boundaries and to have non-negotiables. And for me, boundaries, what we coach most leaders we work with, is a concept called 8 to 13. If I can get you to have 8 to 13 focused hours a week, whether you're a junior manager or a national chain owner, and we block that in red in your calendar, and we have intentional focus time. It's split daily across 5 days, 6 days if you're working 6 days, but we attack that time, and then we serve our people, we serve our partners, our vendors, our staff, our people, our guests in the other hours. If you can give me 8 to 13 hours, we can balance burnout because we're focusing on what matters most. Together, we can identify what that is, be very intentional with that time. But once we're giving the right amount of time, if you gave me 8 to 13 hours, I can change your physical body in 90 days. You can look fundamentally different inside of 90 days. If you are 3 people, 5 people, 15 people on your management team, just commit to 8 hours a week of fully intentional time, and then do whatever else you need to. I trust you to do what else is needed those other hours. I promise you, it can allow us to make sure we're moving forward with intention. And when we are, that gets all the other stuff that's taking, the 12, the midnight emails, the 4:30 a.m., wake up calls, because we've got to get through work before everything takes over. We need to focus. We need to identify what matters most and protect that time, and be selfish, because it'll serve you, it'll serve your people, it'll serve your guests, and ultimately it will fundamentally change your business results if we can change that behavior.
Just my own perspective, for what it's worth, to the folks listening. After doing 300 plus interviews, everything that I've learned over the last 3 years, plus my 20 plus years as an owner or operator. I owned a bar in Hollywood. I owned a Michelin rated fine dining restaurant, a fast casual concept. I've been in all tiers. If I was to open a place tomorrow, the first thing I would do to establish balance and avoid burnout is I would never own a place that's open 7 days a week again. I would never do it in any tier of dining, because the reality is, especially if you are a single unit or you've just got a few units under your belt, if it is open, you're working. And so the best way to avoid that is to shut it down and to give your team the time that they need to reset, and also to create greater demand by creating more scarcity. That's just my 2 cents. For what it's worth.
Just one thing before we move on here, because I think there's a tactical exercise over your morning coffee tomorrow. And I have to get people just to write on a napkin. You can write on your phone. You can, if you got a notebook. I don't still make all of my team carry notebooks, but it really, there's an impact of putting pen to paper on this. Just write out who has boundaries with you. And you start to think, like, we have suppliers who have boundaries with us, managers who have boundaries with us, staff who have boundaries with us. But one thing that I found with high performing leaders is we often allow others to have boundaries with us, but we don't feel confident enough to have boundaries with them. And once we can recognize the people that have boundaries with us, the manager that says, I'm not going to work Sundays when I'm off and my phone is off, we want to respect that. But as a senior leader, you deserve, and the more that you set boundaries, your people will mirror you and follow you. So it's actually, when you do it, it has a ripple benefit effect to the rest of the team. And when we talk about culture, it'll have a positive impact on your culture.
And again, these were all questions that were submitted by you guys prior to the event. Please feel free to drop more questions in the Q&A, and we'll be sure to get to those as well. The next question: how do I create strong, independent leaders within my restaurant? So many times the struggle firsthand is that you bring on someone that you think is going to be a solution that's going to pull you out of the business. You delegate a bunch of stuff. They fall flat on their face. You take all of it back. You're still paying them a premium rate, but now you're doing all of your stuff, all of their stuff. You're checking in on their stuff. You eventually fire them for being incompetent. And now you've wasted all this time and money to be exactly where you were before. If that sounds familiar to anyone, go ahead and say me too in the chat.
Yeah. I wish I could type right now, Josh, because that, I've made the mistake myself. And we look at the pattern. So often in businesses, what we're trying to do is find patterns that work for us and patterns that work against us. And for so many, we've invested in people that we felt were really going to support us, and they ended up turning over. And it leaves us with this feeling of, maybe for you out there, definitely for me and some leaders I work with, guilt, shame, regret, concern to do it again. Is it worth it to do it again? And the one thing that I look at is Brene Brown says, clear is kind. The key thing before we set or create strong independent leaders, we need to create clarity of expectation, and not just expectation of what they're going to do, expectation of how you're going to support them. What does that relationship look like? So I think really defining not just the tactical, the 28 bullet points or the 128 bullet points of how they open, close, and fill out a checklist and fill the ice box and chop limes or whatever you've got them doing. But what are the top 3, maybe 5, hopefully 3 things that they're responsible to do? How do they win in their role? How will they be measured? How will they be celebrated? And we want to be clear, and we want to reward them, not reprimand them, reward them for behavior and direction of their priorities. Because when somebody comes in, they're coming with their experience from another restaurant and experience from another industry, and they're going to try to prove themselves to you. But what we want to do is reward for the behavior that we're looking for. The other thing to create strong independent leaders with inside your restaurant, we take people through, and there's a document that we could share afterwards. It's called the Path to Leadership. What I want to know is, I want people to know how there's a concept of people who are safe. They're rocks inside your company that want to continue to do the role they're in. And there's what we call superstars who want your job on their second week. But what we want to do is create clarity of what's expected at each position. Again, how they will be measured, how they will be recognized and rewarded, and what their core skill set should be. And if you do have a growing organization, how much time should they expect in each position? Because if we're out of agreement on the amount of time for a leader to be an AGM to move to GM, if we're out of agreement, they think it should be 3 months and you think it should be 3 years. Trust me, this happens all the time. Then we're out of agreement, and we create a turnover that was set to happen before the person even started. But if we do a bit of the homework, I really feel a supervisor, a host should know how they get into management, and a manager should know how they get to senior management, or possibly the office if you have one. Creating a path to leadership, communicating that isn't for the person you're hiring. What it does is it holds you or your management team accountable to continue to invest in them as you said you would, even when we get busy. We maintain both sides of the partnership. We do what we said we would do. We create clarity of expectation for them. It takes a little bit of work, and by a little bit of work, a couple hours, being playful on a piece of paper. It's not a perfect science. And then communicate that, share that in your interviews, review it with all your existing people to make sure you're in agreement. Now, most people understand what they want and what you want, but we're still not in agreement as to how we serve or bring that to life. If we do this simple work, I've worked with some incredible teams that have allowed their organization to double in size based on the ability just to communicate consistently and clearly to their people. And that created confident, independent leaders driving in the direction of the goals of the business, not just themselves.
To speak to overwhelm, that was a mouthful.
Sorry, that's a lot. That's a full day workshop right there. But yeah, it's a good exercise to go through.
But back to overwhelm, right? So, they listen to you and then they go, well, geez, so I'm going to need to write out all of this stuff before I can even consider bringing on a manager that can bail me out. I don't have the time to do what I'm doing currently. How am I going to do this? So actionable, granular steps for somebody that wants to either build up the leaders they currently have, right, within the ranks, or bring in somebody that could potentially help support their efforts. The first step is creating that first roadmap. You said, what's the next step?
The next step is, once we create the roadmap, and first thing to go through, it seems like a lot, but I want to share my most heartbreaking story that happens every month. I walk into your restaurant and I meet with your new manager, and they say, Matt, it's great to see you. I'm crushing it. I'm doing everything they asked me to do. I'm staying late. I'm training more. I'm working weekends. I haven't had a chance to bathe my daughter, but I'm here. I'm all in. Like, this is the stuff I hear to bring it back. It's real. And then I go into the office or boardroom, and the leaders go, man, that new hire's not working out. I just wish they would do what we wanted them to do. And I'm like, oh, that's the heartbreaking disconnect, because what we miss is the communication. So the biggest thing to do is we have to get clarity of expectation to paper, and then just communicate it consistently. What's your fun, fair, playful meeting with them? It gets big and hairy and it gets prickly once we don't talk about it. So if we don't share feedback, it gets harder and harder. If we just have a focus, here's what we set an expectation on, and how are you performing versus the expectation? Then we can talk about other stuff, growth, innovation, all your ideas. But if we just continue that, and it doesn't need to be hour-long meetings. I really encourage you not to have hour-long meetings. It can be a 5-minute moving one-on-one. It could be, everybody drives to work and from work. I utilize my car in the time like crazy, as I encourage my clients to 5-minute check-ins. But just, we need to, everybody in your organizations deserves to know exactly where they stand versus your expectation. And once they know that, they can provide feedback. Consistency of that conversation will create some great clarity, and it'll prevent that overwhelm. So just to be, as Josh's question, just map it out, back of a napkin, worksheet we can provide you, create your own piece of paper, your own process, communicate it, and then consistently revisit it.
Which brings me to my next point, which would be, the hard thing about having hard conversations is just that they're really hard to have. And I can't imagine that everyone on the call doesn't find themselves in a similar position to where I was, which was that there were people that needed to go. And there were people that were dragging down the team. And, I understand that the labor market's tighter today than it was in 2019 and 2020, but it certainly wasn't overwhelmingly populist back then either. And so you do feel the need to hold on to these people and to not actively manage them and try and mold them, because those conversations are hard to have. And I think we want to please people. I think we want to make people happy. So, because that's just the nature of the industry that we're in. So you turn to me and you say, "Hey, Josh, how am I doing?" I'm like, "You're doing great." And then I think to myself, someone's definitely going to need to fire that guy at some point, and it won't be me.
That won't be me. So, yeah.
Right? How do you have those conversations? How do you condition yourself to lead, to have the tough conversations in the right moments in a way that gets you the desired result?
So what I would encourage people to do, because we'll go back to that, as humans, we move away from pain and we move toward pleasure. So I'd have you go back to a point in time and just think about when you knew that you needed to have a difficult conversation and you didn't, and what did it grow into? And I'm sure there's a few examples, because what we want to do is get real. We don't want to think about what could happen, what has happened, what's the pattern of when we didn't have the difficult conversation, what's the pattern when we did have the difficult conversation, and what was the outcome? The challenge right now in business, if you want your business to get the results that it wants and deserves, we need to be selfish, because the selfish, as long as it's well intended, it doesn't hurt your people and it serves your guest. You're running a fair operation. Once we're selfish and clear on the goals, then it allows us to have those conversations. Because when I often say, a lot of groups I go into have incredible managers that just don't fit your culture anymore. And that's okay. But if we leave them, I've watched single individuals tear apart cultures from the inside. They don't even mean to do it. And when they get to leave and go on to someone's next, who's left to clean up that challenge, clean up that mess? Because it ripples. It's you. It's hardly ever about you to the person who needs the difficult conversation. It's everybody else watching and waiting when that conversation's not happening, and the cultural ripple that happens when your people see you not making a decision that everybody knows should be made. And the decision is, I'm not a head count person. I'm not asking you to let go of your people. I'm just asking to make sure in a fair, fun, playful way to let them know where they stand. And yes, that first conversation is going to be difficult, but when you're grounded in knowing what the outcome is, what the intention is, that you're a caring person and it's allowing them to get better or get better somewhere else, we need to make those decisions. And I know if you're not making that decision based on the fear of how do I replace them, that's another conversation. And we can hopefully get to that later. Is we need to be attracting all the time, so we're not holding on to people who no longer fit.
Which, A players like to work with A players, and a huge part of what attracts those A players is a positive company culture. Yeah. So again, everybody on the call is busy. Everybody's doing a bunch of different things. What are some easy ways they could improve their company's culture?
Yeah. And we could go really deep on this, but I'm going to say simple and relentless on this feedback. Recognition, positive recognition. We see on TV, we see the Gordon Ramsays and the John Taffers yelling at people. I'm sure, Josh, you probably met both of those people along your travels as I have. That is not how they run their operations. That's for TV. The days of yelling at people for what's not getting done, they are over. They're culturally over, especially as younger generations of management come in place. What my belief is recognition is a process. If we want it to be successful, it needs to be a process, and we build a recognition-focused culture with our clients. Very simple. I'm not asking us to manufacture it or pat people on the back for stuff they're not doing, but we create a simple process. And there is a document we can share after the town hall that'll support this. Is who do we recognize for what, when, and how? And what's the budget? I don't care if the budget's $20, but when I come back and figure out, did we spend the $20 and we didn't? I just want you to ask yourself why. And if we spent 35, did we get a return on the $35? Recognition for most is free. It is the number one thing that can change your culture. It needs to be done consistently, and it needs to mirror the expectation that you've set. If we can just recognize more often, it'll fundamentally change your culture.
I think it's so easy to forget. We talk about this in my coaching groups all the time. It's so easy to forget what it was like before you were an owner, right? When you were coming up in the industry, and when the owner would walk in, like the butterflies that you would get, and the excitement and appreciation you would feel when you felt seen and selected by that human. It's such a big deal. And it's so easy, because we're constantly swimming through the muck to not see ourselves the way other people see us. But people live for that recognition, to be seen by this amazing entrepreneur that built this amazing thing that I really enjoy working in. It makes a huge impact.
We talk about making people feel seen, valued, and heard. And one thing we often do in our keynotes or workshops is say, think of somebody that you're really proud of in the last week. And anybody listening to this, watching this can do this. And just what I encourage them to do, middle of, say, we did this keynote talk in Mexico a few weeks ago. Everybody get out their phone and message the person. So we take this 3-minute exercise. So everybody goes and message. I really want to thank you for this last week. It meant a lot to me. And for our side is what we're talking about is make them feel seen, valued, and heard. And how we come back to that in the talk is, as I walk out to lunch and overlooking this beach in Mexico, I had people coming over to saying, wow, the responses, people saying thank you and encourage you, or what else they wanted to share, or how they did more of it. I feel that the pandemic took away connection and community. And now we're back inside of our businesses and we're charging forward, but we might not be sharing what we feel because we've kind of been conditioned that way. I encourage you, just simple recognition on an ongoing basis so it doesn't shock people. If it's once, it's going to shock people. They're not going to know where it came from, but just consistent. We need it. We deserve it. We're in a fun, playful industry. We're creating experiences for a living, no matter what your concept is. But are we creating experiences for our people where they can recognize that what they're doing matters?
How do I keep my team focused and motivated?
Mm-hmm. The one thing I'd ask you that we go through is, how do you play to win? So one thing we ask people is, are you playing to win, or are you simply playing not to lose? And I'll share that again is, are we playing to win, or are you simply playing not to lose? Some of us had to play not to lose during the pandemic, during the recovery, during the last year, whatever that looks like. But really now, if we want to keep people focused and motivated, is how do we play to win? And I'm from Toronto, so I'll share this example because it was only 4 years ago. But 4 years ago, the Toronto Raptors won the NBA championship. They won, as I think Kawhi Leonard said, the Larry O.B. And one example I gave is the Raptors have been a good team for over a decade, a little bit long for a basketball team, but they went all in and they went to play to win by going and getting Kawhi. Although they knew we might only have him for a year, we didn't believe it, but they went all in. And this whole motivation of the players, of everybody in the organization, of everybody in the city rallying behind, is how do you play to win? What is the definition of success? And my belief is, as Simon Sinek says, is profitability is a result of consistent human behavior. Profit is a goal that your people might not care about, but why should your people, excuse my language, give a shit about what your goal is? Why should your team care? And we want to say these aren't big, crazy goals, but this is what we're looking to do. And this is why it matters to our people. And we're going to reinvest in the restaurant, or we're going to make sure everybody has hours, or we're going to create innovation of product, or we're going to, but we just want to set a clear goal. How do we win? And I go to sports because it's very clear. The Toronto Blue Jays know how they win. The Toronto Raptors know how they win. The Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm sure not a lot of hockey fans listen to this in Canada, but the Leafs are going to win the cup this year. They know exactly how they're going to win. Does your team know how it's going to win? Because if they don't, sustainable motivation is difficult. So how do we just set that one clear goal? And it might be guest count. It might be guest experience. It might be filling your staffing rosters to make sure that the average restaurant in North America right now is short 17% of its staff on a daily basis. That might be your number one goal, is to fill your staffing roster, because that ripples, creates a better guest experience, delivers your business results. Whatever that goal is, share it, get people to buy in. And the goal is not for you. It should be selfish where it serves the business, but the goal is for the team, that everybody needs to believe in and buy into it.
I think there's also this paradigm shift that happened in my business, and I'm hoping is happening in everyone else's, where people refer to their teams not as teams, right? We're a family, Well, I mean, I don't know how everyone else grew up, but there wasn't a whole lot of accountability, transparency, or honesty in the family that I grew up in. Because when you love someone, when you have that personal relationship with them,
Yeah.
it's really hard to develop accountability. And when we changed from being one big happy family to a professional team,
Yeah.
we are all stars here. What ended up happening was I was holding them accountable. They were holding me accountable. They were holding each other accountable. And what I found was everyone was an A player in their own way by the time we had pared down the team, but not everyone shared the same skill sets. They would work with each other to elevate. Hey, I noticed your per customer average is really low. These are a few of the things that I do to elevate mine. Or, hey, I've noticed that you've struggled with this or that. How can I support you in that way? And in doing so, a rising tide raised all ships. But for me, the foundation to keeping them focused and motivated was this focus that came externally and this motivation that came internally from within the group, because they saw themselves differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I'm not a sports person. Sorry for the sports analogy. I like sports, but I'm not trying to bring sports analogies here. But if you want to go back to, the Alabama coach Nick Saban, or everybody here will know Tom Brady. There's lots of videos on YouTube of Tom Brady, at the line of scrimmage, yelling at his team or on the sideline saying, "Do your job." And that might look aggressive, but when we're clear on a team in a positive way of how do we contribute and what is our role inside this incredible team? It could be a host that works 2 nights a week, or your manager that's working 60 hours a week. But how do we do our jobs to support the bigger goal? And I can tell you that Tom Brady's hard on his people, but they've also celebrated a lot of championships with him as the most successful person. Sometimes we just need to be clear on how do we all do our jobs? And to our point, how do we balance and do what we need to move the business forward?
Let's talk about attraction.
Mhm.
How can I convince hourly workers to work for me?
I can ask one simple question because we're sharing some stories here, but the one question I'd want you to answer is, what is your promise to your people? So if they're going to exchange, so right now, the one thing that's changed is there's a shortage of hourly workers. There's a shortage of managers. So they now have the leverage to choose should they work for us or not. And one thing I'd want to be able to answer in your interview process is what is your promise and commitment to them? So what's the experience like? There's so many people in restaurants, they come work for us. It's going to be fun. It's great. It's playful. You get this and that. And they show up, and in their first 3 shifts, they know it is not that. It is difficult. You're short. It's challenging. People are frustrated. Guests are frustrated. All of these things. We need to tell the truth to our people. What does it mean and look like to work for you, to work with you? And what's that promise? And you need to hold that promise. We have a bunch. The one thing I'll share is, if you're looking to attract hourly workers, the game has changed. And if you're attracting the way you did in 2022 or in 2019, you'll end up short on your staffing rosters. How we write job ads, where we place job ads, how we boost them, how we interview. There's a video series that we've got that we'll share. There's an hour of the top content we have on this concept. I've worked on this not for the pandemic. We've worked on helping people attract and retain staff and managers for over a decade. We have to change the game to change the results. And there's simple ways to do it because most people are doing the same. So you just need to take a different approach to get a different result. But first starts with what's your promise to your people and how do you uphold that every single day?
And how do you feel about, so I think for so many of us, I was seated in Los Angeles for the tenure of my career.
Yep.
And everybody was one decent audition away from telling me to go screw myself.
Yeah.
How do you mitigate that? How do you work around the idea that so many of the people that work for us see it as this transitional thing? And so when you're competing with someone that wants more than anything, cash and flexibility, how do you differentiate yourself?
Yeah. So I think, and there's one key thing there that I want you to look at your operation. So we often look at what we call employee avatars. So often when we have, say, 30% of your staff is revolving, they're with you for 90 to 120 days. They're looking for their audition. They're looking for, the bigger dollar. They're looking, and they're turning over. But in most operations, we have 3 core avatars. So we have kind of a consistent person, flex person, 3 months to 12 months, and then somebody maybe inside of 90 days. Because often we're looking at our staff as if all people want the same thing, and that's not the case. I don't want you to have 20 avatars. So if you had 3 core avatars and you could actually put people's names, people that currently work for you, but what do they want and need? What does that person who's been with you for 6 years, what do they want and need? Why are they with you? Why are they committed to you? How have you secured them? Why have they stayed with you? If you don't know the answer, you can ask them. For the people that are with you for that 9 to 12 months or 9 to 18 months, we want to go to a few of them and ask them, why did you stay when there's other options, or a new restaurant open up down the street? What made you stay here? Often it's the leadership. Sometimes it's the money. Sometimes it's the experience, but what are you doing to create it? And then all of us are going to have transient staff. And are we willing to tolerate a certain percentage of transient staff? And once we go into interviews, and this is getting a bit technical and deep here, what I ask people to do is identify which of the avatars that person is that we're hiring. Do we have, and we might be wrong, but with the best of intention, sharing with them is who are they and how do we meet their needs? Because say it's the summer months in LA and we want to keep that person that's usually going to jump at 70 days, but we keep them for 120 because we have a different conversation or a different motivation, or we give them more flexibility. Think of the ROI in that time, because we focus on it with intention. And Sally's the best, and Sally stayed, and we gave Sally a couple extra days off for her auditions. But then we also, in a simple way, we're just able to sit, because often your tenured people, 9 to 18 months, or, and this is a broad strokes comment, or your 3, 5, 7-year employee, what they want is space and time. That when we do hundreds, if not thousands, of discovery sessions with staff a year. And what they traditionally want is time with you, or just some exposure. As Josh said, there's a wow to you, whether you're the manager or the owner. When they want some time, they want to know where the business is going, they want to know where they fit. So if we just get clear on what our core people want and need and how we provide it, and taking the approach that not all your employees are the same.
Great advice. What are some retention tools for hanging on to quality people?
Yeah, I think from a retention perspective, some of the key things we'll go back to is, how do we have recognition? So I'm going to repeat some points I said I would. So how do we have a recognition focused culture so they know where they stand? If we want to retain people, we need to provide them consistent and candid feedback. Candid might seem challenging or conflict, but it's not. It's just, how do we let everybody know exactly where they stand? And then how are we having conversations around that path to leadership? And the next thing that I'll share, so path to leadership, meaning if they're in a role and they're looking to go up, what do they need to do? How will they be measured? How will they be celebrated? What's a core expectation or talent that we want in their role? But I think there's simplicity sides of recognition, candid communication, and a path to leadership. And then the other thing that, if you're looking frontline staff, but let's move to management for a second. There's this whole concept of one-on-ones or development sessions or conversations with your team. I do encourage you to make sure you have a feedback frequency to those people where you're connecting with them, especially your senior leaders. And I know we're all tight on time, but people who don't know where they stand, and my phone's rang hundreds of times in the last few years from senior leaders, GM and up, even into the office, even to C-level positions, that no longer knew where they stood in the organization based on lack of communication. So they were considering leaving. If we let people know exactly where they stand through consistent one-on-ones, and we can support with simple processes, this might sound like a lot, but I promise you, I'm not a complex person. I'm a very simple approach to the work that we do. If we have simple, consistent one-on-ones once a week or once a month, as long as it's consistent, and let them know where they stand, it'll multiply your retention, because most people are running at ops and not focused on the wants and needs of their people.
What I found from firsthand experience was that when people stopped learning, they stopped caring. Mm-hmm. And so for front of house, our commitment in the early days, and we held true to this, was, I'll teach you how to sell. I'll teach you about business. You'll actually get to learn how to effectively run a business using my money, because you're running a mini business within my business. I'll teach you how to cook at a professional level, if that's something you're interested in, and you'll walk out of here knowing how to make a damn good drink. And that was regardless of position. And like you said, I think accessibility was huge. I hosted 2 hours worth of office hours on Friday. I don't know about for everyone on the call, but for me, Friday was a shit show. It was. So there was no point in actually planning to get any effective work done on Friday, because so many things would happen. So many people needed my attention. But on Fridays, I would allocate 2 hours where I would just sit in my office. And if you wanted to talk to me, you could, about your education, about your career outside the restaurant. If you were an actor and you were looking for management, what's the best way to get one? One of the cool things about what we do for a living is we ask for very little from others outside of our industry, and we give a lot. So I had a huge network in Los Angeles, and I was able to leverage that network to further the careers of the people that worked for me, which ultimately led to them leaving to go to greener pastures, but it was in their chosen career. And they were able to tell other people and advocate for me that this is a place where you can get where you want to go. That this isn't a place to waste your time, that this is an investment you're making in the rest of your career. And it really worked for us. It resonated well.
I think I want everybody to hear there, because there's some brilliant things that Josh always shares on whatever platform he's on. But when he's talking about those conversations, who's he talking about? He's not talking about management, the operation. So many teams are having one-on-ones. It's just another management meeting. Josh is talking about them and what they want to need and what they care about and how he meets their needs and how he supplies it. And he knows the patterns, because he knows what people might want or need inside the roles from who he's hiring. These are powerful things. What we want to talk about is ourselves. We want to be seen, valued, and heard. Creating 10 minutes, 2 hours with open window for multiple people to attend, to show that we're accessible and available and we care about them and we're willing to support them, is powerful. And the other company that I have, we do inventory. The teams do inventory, and our average employee is 7 to 8 years, because what we share them is we're building future entrepreneurs. My ops manager just left Friday, and he's going to run a winery. He joined me. He left a comic shop selling comic books. He loves comic books. Has more experience than anybody. He came, he gave it everything. He's running a major winery in Niagara Falls, Ontario. As the operations manager, I couldn't be more proud, because we're creating future leaders and future entrepreneurs. That's my promise to you. If you exchange your time to invest inside my operation, again, what's your promise and commitment to your people?
As we wrap up, I do want to take an opportunity to get to the live Q&A.
Yeah.
There's going to be a post-webinar survey that goes out, guys. We're also going to be sending you all of the stuff that Matt mentioned today, plus a whole lot more stuff, so you could work on it. But to delve directly into the Q&A, we have a question here. How do you build a brand within a local community?
Mm-hmm. I think the big thing when it comes to brand, and there's a lot of conversation. I'm not a marketer, but we've done a lot of work and have met with a lot of marketers. To build a brand is a big conversation, but to build out your presence in your community, I think the key thing is, number one, is identifying, why does your community need you to exist? You've heard me say that a couple of times, but it's a question. It's not my question. It's another celebrity thought leader's question that he takes everybody through in his sessions. And why does your community need you to exist? And then what does community presence look like for you? I have major brands, like there's a group we worked with, 150 plus quick service pizza chain, but they are relentless in their presence in their community. And if they're not, the concepts fail. If they don't, whether it's a small area or a new area. But how do you identify why your community needs you, and where do you meet them where they're at? How do you get involved in the community, entrenched in the community in the way that supports your business? And that might not be detailed enough, but I really do feel that brand and community is simple. And I guess the other thing that says, what is your community? I'm in the city of Toronto. We're the 4th biggest city in North America. For most of my operators or locations, their community is not the city of Toronto. Their community is a very small defined area of who they serve and where their core guest is. So what is your defined community? Who's your core guest? Where are they at? And how do you meet them where they're at?
To tug on that string a bit further, one of the things that I struggled with for years and then eventually overcame, because as it turns out, you're right, so much of this is easy, is when we were trying to figure out how to serve the community and what the community wanted and how to get more people like our regulars into the restaurant. We, as managers and as owners, we would get in these closed rooms together and ideate on all of these things that could potentially be. And it was a total waste of time. The most effective way to get it done was, if there's a patron that you would like, I wish all my patrons were like this person, you interview them, right? Hey, can you come in? Can I get you a bite? Bring a friend. I just want to ask you a few questions. How did you find out about us? What purpose do we serve in your life? How do you describe us to other people? Like there's an opportunity there. And when it comes to greater community engagement, you look at the other models out there that you aspire to be like. What are they doing? Who are they talking to? What I found is there's a restaurateur on the planet that won't give me the keys to the city. Yeah. Everybody's willing to support me if I'm willing to support them. One of the big questions that I get with frequency is, there's a new burger joint coming in. How can I compete with this new burger joint that's going to compete directly with my burger joint? I'm like, invite the chef into your kitchen. do a collaboration to celebrate them opening. There's more than enough money for everybody out there. And so when you do things like that, they're not your competitor. You are an arbiter of taste. And now your community looks to you to answer those questions. Where should I eat? Where should I go? When should I go? It's again, another paradigm shift.
Yeah, I love that. That's as you were talking, the thing I was thinking is success leaves clues. So look to somebody, whether they're direct or indirect competitor, whether they're in the hospitality space or outside, who's owning your community right now and what are they doing in order to do it. And we worked with a group on the West Coast of the US that just exactly as Josh said, found out who were their influencers were and went and did collabs with them. And the power and the brand and the social and the connection and the innovation that came from that helped both sides was, I just got a chance to go, I guess a month or so ago to a dinner. And it was incredible, but the buzz around the city, because there's people working towards a common goal. There is competition, but in most successful relationships, you'll see the competition walls come down and how do we help each other move this industry forward? Because we need each other right now.
Had a great question from someone else. I'm a new restaurant, open 6 months. What is the main thing I should be focusing on?
My strong opinion, I am not right, but I feel I'm right on this, Josh. Like what coming out, and I don't want to talk about the pandemic, and I know the pandemic's over and wherever you are, you might have forgot long about it, but it has left an imprint. The biggest thing is we look at all the guest trends across North America, across Europe and Australia and New Zealand, what the guest wants, because they have less discretionary income. So they're choosing now where they spend that money, depending on who your core guest is. But what is that experience? What is the simple experience? And so many restaurants have service guides or steps of service. We look at what are the 3 things you're looking to do with every single guest, usually at the start. So how it begins with the guest relationship, the actual order or the engagement, and how do we give them a reason to return? But what is your guest experience, whether you're quick service or fine dining or a hotel or somewhere in between? And how do we make sure to celebrate, recognize, and force our staff behaviors in the direction of that experience? If you provide a consistent experience, I promise you'll win. There's so many average or poor experiences across all retail happening right now that it doesn't take much to interrupt the pattern. Be clear, be great. And I wanted to swear there to isolate, but I won't. I want you to be great. And I want you to think every time your doors open, that open switch goes on or guests are in your restaurant, are you executing that guest experience? If you focus there, especially 6 months in, I promise you can win. I promise you can carve your niche out in your community and your staff will be clear on what's expected of them when they come in.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's to further kind of define. For me, it was always about alignment and automation, especially in the early days. Everybody's got to be aligned around what a great guest experience looks like. And that process has to be automated. It must be automated. And by that, I mean that if it's somebody's anniversary, like why would an employee ever need to go to a manager or to the owner and say, are we going to do something special for this? Right? If somebody doesn't like a meal or they don't like a dish, what's the process? I mean, do they really need to go get a manager to say, what, they didn't like their sandwich?
No.
We thought that the steak wasn't done particularly well. You're not going to charge them for food that they didn't like. So automating those processes so that people feel the value is incredibly, in both of those things, come down to empowering your staff. Yeah. This is what winning looks like, and these are the tools at your disposal to win. For us, it was as simple as saying, everyone leaves happy. If you followed any of my content, you understand that that was across 3 tiers of dining. All I cared about was that everyone left happy. Spend as much money as you need to do it. Say whatever you need to do. Bend or break every rule to get it done. But everybody walks out happier than the moment they walked in. Everyone was aligned on that. Everyone had a dozen tools to get it done. And if you can establish that in the first 6 months, you've already started working on your business, not in it.
Yeah. I'd love to add to that, but I'm going to leave that there. I've got more to share, but that couldn't agree more.
The last question we'll take is from Kevin, who said, fantastic approach with the 8-13 technique. I wasn't able to write down all of the points, but for you to further explore that idea, where do people find that time? Where does that time find the time, right? Like, where does that time exist?
Yeah. Great question. So, because the concept, and that's the objection that we're always working with going into a leader or leadership team. And stick with me as I share this story. So often somebody will say, Matt, how do you start working? And we're lucky enough to work for the most part with the top 10% of the industry, highly successful groups looking to scale, looking for more success. But I'll often meet with somebody in their big fancy boardroom, overlooking water somewhere or some big huge oak table, and it's a fun meeting. But I'm walking in and I'm looking, and as I'm meeting with the leader, incredible female leaders, incredible male leaders, what I'm often seeing in a first meeting is something buzzing that they're looking towards, or their laptop, because it's their office. And what I'll ask them to do is I'll ask them to turn their laptop around about halfway through the meeting and show me their calendar. And they'll say, I don't understand what you mean. I'm saying, I physically want to see, I don't want to see the detail. I just want to visually see your calendar. And what ends up happening in most cases, you'll see the leaders, and these are the presidents, the owners, the C-level positions, the VPs, where their hands quickly go into their face. And I've seen some of the most dominant leaders have tears roll down their face because it's just not sustainable. And my question to you to find the time is, how hard does it need to get? If what you're doing now is not getting you the results that you want and deserve, the only way to change it is to change it. And we're only looking for that 8 to 13 hours. So what I want you to do is find the motivation for change first. Again, tactics and process follow after. But if we don't have the why and the anchor, if we don't have gravity that's strong enough, that's pulling us in the direction of who we want to become, we will go back to who we were. And we can go through all the research and studies and books you can read on that. But so the first thing is, why change? And so we find that motivation there. And I want you to write it out. I'm not a cheesy person, but I've got whiteboards all throughout the office. I got whiteboards through my house. Find out why we need to change. And then what we want to find out is, what can we delegate or stop? I did an audit on my time last year, and I found that I was under just over, I think it was 58% productive in my week, which meant that I had 62% of time. I'm busy. And everybody thinks I'm busy. I was wasting a ton of time every single week in conversations that I didn't need to be in, making decisions that I wasn't the right person to be making, doing things to help my team that I was actually hurting rather than helping. And I say this humbly, not making any judgment that this is you, this is my experience. But what can we delegate, or what can we stop in order to find time to invest in what matters most? And I encourage you on the 8 to 13 range, if we just started with 8 hours. And I want you to see the momentum, make a commitment to yourself. And so we can change our diet, we can change our bodies by going to the gym, we can pass courses. If you took a course and you want to become a tennis player and you did eight hours a week for the next 3 months, you can learn to be a tennis player. What I want us to do is learn what matters most. And by investing that time and staying consistent with it, you'll see the benefit. And our brains are very simple. This is, if we want to go back to I work with a lot of people in addiction, do this and it feels good. If we do a behavior consistently, it feels good inside of our business. The brain goes, when I commit to myself, that feels good, and we get better results, and your brain will want to do more. We just need to consistently invest the time. My question for you is, are you getting the results you deserve right now? And if you're not, what's the simple and tightly, a couple hours a week change that you can make to fundamentally shift the results that you're getting or the experience that you're having?
That's a great place to leave it. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Rolfe. We're going to be following up this webinar with a with an email that it's going to give you access to Matt, access to all of Matt's materials that he referenced. The man is a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We know you're busy. And on behalf of me and Matt and Yelp for Restaurants, we will see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.